Welcome to the other side of medicine. I'm Dr. Krystosik. I am your advocate. I am your watchdog to help to protect you from the ravages of aging. Not only that, from big pharma and all the other big conglomerates that are trying to take away your health and your well-being. And tonight here on the other side of medicine, we have a special guest. Glad to have this guest on. She's Dr. Joe, and I just really enjoy speaking with her the last couple of days here, and we've had a nice conversation. And I wanted to give her the opportunity to just give a little bit about your background, Doc. I think it's really, really important that people understand how much knowledge you have in homeopathy. So go ahead and tell us your background.
Thank you, Dr. Krystosik. I wanted first thank you very, very much for having me on your show. I'm very excited to be here. I think we align on a lot of things and thoughts, so I think it's really good. So I have a rather unusual background. I have 3 engineering degrees, and as I like to say, the natural thing for you to do after that is to quit your director of engineering job and go become a homeopath. So basically, I studied chiropractic like you, National University of Health Sciences. I then did a postdoc at the Canadian Academy of Homeopathy. I taught homeopathy actually to naturopaths at the university, and I also was previously the president of the Illinois Homeopathic Medical Association. And for me, it is my absolute passion. I love homeopathy and I love healing people through homeopathy.
Okay, so for our listening audience benefit, because some people are going to know what homeopathy is, some people are not. It's just like totally a foreign thing to them. But first of all, I need to let people know this is a very safe and effective and time-proven way to be able to cure and treat various types of acute and chronic illnesses. As a matter of fact, the royal family in England is one of their primary sources of medicine. Isn't that right, Dr. Pollock?
Absolutely. In fact, I have met the royal physician, the former royal physician, he's passed at this point. But yes, they've always had a royal physician who is a homeopath from, for probably since homeopathy's been around. I believe Hahnemann, the founder of homeopathy, might have treated them back in the day. So yes, it is one of what I love about homeopathy is it absolutely works with your body. In fact, we know as homeopaths that if you can't heal it, we can't heal you. For instance, type 1 diabetes, because your pancreas is so completely damaged by the time you get diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, homeopathy does nothing for you. It is always dependent on the body to actually heal itself. And a lot of people mistake homeopathy.
Give us the Reader's Digest version of what homeopathic remedy is. Let's just kind of start with that, the basics, okay?
I was going to start by a lot of people confuse homeopathy and herbals. They're not the same. Homeopathic remedies come from natural substances, flowers, a lot of them. The difference is they're highly diluted. And in that highly dilution, they're made specifically, there's a requirement on how they're made. There's something called the HPUS, which is the US designation of how they're actually made. But whereas herbals are large concentrations, homeopathy is actually highly diluted. And one of the weirder things about homeopathy, which confuses everyone, is that it actually becomes more effective the higher the dilution, which is just one of those strange things, which I've done a little bit of research and I have some idea on why they might be, but it's very, very, very different than herbals. And the other important thing, so there's 2 principles of homeopathy. Sorry, go ahead.
Yes. So for our listening audience benefit, just let me try. I know because you're so steeped in it. Sometimes it's a little bit more, I guess, difficult for you to just dilute it, to bring it down to its simplest form. But somebody outside like myself who's not that familiar with homeopathy. I use it a little bit of it, but to be able to explain it. So, just for our listening audience's benefit, let's say we take an herb like chamomile, which is a very mild herb to begin with. A homeopathic remedy might
Yep.
take, let's say, a quart of the tea of chamomile and take one drop out of that and then dilute it and put that one drop into another quart and then shake it up and then take another drop out of the second quart and put it into a third, fourth, fifth, and maybe go 10 times like that. And it becomes more potent as it becomes more diluted. And that's what Dr. Joe is talking about. Is that a fair assessment of what the remedies are created like?
That's a very, very good assessment. Yes. Thank you, Doc.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
So there's two basic principles of homeopathy. One, which is the dilution. And the second principle of homeopathy is like cures like. And you actually see this in the annals of naturopathic medicine as well. But the concept is, so say arnica, probably the single most commonly used remedy is arnica. And arnica, we all know, is for bruising. So in toxic amounts of arnica, it would cause a bruising type pain, that sensitivity you get on your arm when you actually have been bruised. So arnica in toxic amounts causes that sensitivity. In diluted amounts, it cures what it actually, the symptom that it actually shows in toxic amounts. So that's one, like yours like. And then dilution, which you just described, are the two primary principles of homeopathy, neither of which you really find in the herbal world very much at all.
Okay. Okay, so you mentioned arnica. When we're talking tonight, we're going to dive into how homeopathic remedies are very effective for pain and inflammation. So describe to our listening audience of how homeopathy helps pain and inflammation.
So, as we mentioned, arnica is the single most common used remedy. And the way I like to describe it to people is this, is the best that I can tell, and based on 20 plus years of studying homeopathy, observing homeopathy with an engineering mind, is let's say that you run yourself into a door, right? And it's going to cause a little bruise. When you take a homeopathic remedy and or put a homeopathic patch on, it makes your body believe that you got hit by a baseball bat, and thus takes far more the cytokines and other things to go there to clean it up and improve it so that you don't bruise as badly. Does that answer your question? Do you get that?
Sure. Yeah. So for our listening audience's benefit, cytokines are compounds that the body creates, right?
To clean up. Basically, I sometimes just call them minions. What they are, it doesn't matter. But whatever you do to go help and heal that, all homeopathy does is amplifies that. It increases what you send there to clean up. One of the things is cytokines are used to clean up things. So that's what homeopathy does across the board. Now, that's an acute stage. I can talk a little bit about chronic. So in the acute stage, there's standard remedies that we will talk about in a little bit later. Okay, there's standard remedies. They're super easy to use. That's the purpose of our conversation. There's also a whole nother world of homeopathy, which is for chronic illness. And in chronic illness, it's called precision medicine or individualized medicine. I used to treat a lot of eczema. I would be presented with a child with eczema, and, pretty much in Western medicine, you just put a corticosteroid on and it works on everyone. In homeopathy, I could use any one of 50 different remedies to treat that eczema, and I had to talk to somebody for 2 hours to figure out what that remedy is. And it's very complex and it's very detailed questions. We've got a database that we use and a computer program, but it is very, very, very precise. And that's the only way you can really do it effectively. There's a large number of remedies that people can buy over the counter, but they're generally not going to be as precise, and they're not going to generally work as well as if you go to a homeopath. It's probably similar, I would say, to functional medicine, where you can take a ton of herbs, but really figuring out what works for that person specifically is an art, and it's something you actually have to do. So that's a chronic world.
Mhm.
In the acute world, there's maybe 6 remedies that you can use that are universal, and you don't really need to individualize much. Did you have a question?
No. I was just going to just say that if you could give you a couple examples of how homeopathy helps with chronic conditions. You mentioned eczema. We're talking about inflammation and pain. Let's talk about something like rheumatoid arthritis or osteoarthritis or something of that nature, a chronic condition. So, have you seen homeopathic remedies that are effective in helping people with those type of arthritides?
Yeah, so rheumatoid arthritis, definitely. I know I've had at least 5 patients that I treated for rheumatoid arthritis, and all of them, their RA factors went down, and they were able to go off their meds. In the case of of osteoarthritis, no. I mean, there's really nothing I know of in homeopathy that's effective in healing osteoarthritis. Will I say that if you are the concept of homeopathy is you want your body to be running like a very well-tuned machine. I would suggest, but I don't really have any, it's just an observation that if you're running like a well-tuned machine, all of your symptoms related to all the other things, maybe you have headaches and those are gone, that you're not going to be as likely to develop osteoarthritis. That would be my guess. But once it's formed, we really don't have any effective treatments for osteoarthritis specifically.
Yeah, you mentioned steroids.
Other things,
Yeah, you mentioned steroids. Things like
mhm.
the prednisone and other steroids that doctors use for. You mentioned it for eczema, but it's used also for people who have got very serious pain syndromes, whether it's rheumatoid arthritis or it's a traumatic experience or even osteoarthritis. They'll use cortisone. Um, there's a lot of side effects with those medications with cortisone. We're talking about people that can end up with infections and high blood pressure and osteoporosis and glaucoma and a lot of other kinds of conditions that can be side effects from those meds. Homeopathy does not have side effects. Is that correct? Harmful side effects.
It does not. No. No, it doesn't. There are, one of the nice things is there's actually no known side effects. The only thing that we notice, and actually not even a lot of interaction with medication, probably the only thing I will say is if you think about steroids, steroids work against the body. Your body is trying to work on healing it. It shuts it down so that it reduces the pain sometimes, not always, but it shuts down your body's ability to heal. And in fact, it's the one case where very, very commonly, if somebody's on steroids, homeopathic remedies don't work because they're at cross purposes. If you shut down your ability to heal, if I'm depending on your body to heal, it's not going to do any good. So the one case I would not combine homeopathy with is with steroids. Other than that, in general, it tends to work either way. But in the case of steroids, it doesn't work. Homeopathy will be blunted by its shutting down the body.
Mhm, mhm. Okay, well, let's have you continue to talk about, the chronic and the acute conditions and the experience you've had with homeopathic remedies and some of the examples of patients you've been able to help.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about arnica. So I'm guessing if anyone has any experience, actually, you talked about using Tramiel, which also has arnica in it. It's one of its main ingredients. But arnica is the single most commonly used remedy, and it's typically known for bruising, pain, and swelling. And it is absolutely fantastic for it. There's a couple of things that affect the efficacy of arnica. One, I have some arnica pellets here with me. This is an oral dose. You also have, I know that no one on, this is going to be audio mostly. So there's a small tube in my hand. There's also, if other people would have seen gels, which is basically something you open it up and you rub it on your skin and it goes into the skin pretty quickly. The difference is that the gels from a homeopathic standpoint are very, very, very low potency. The oral doses go up to potencies that are very, very high. And as a practitioner, generally, we don't use the gels very often because they're so low potency that we don't even bother. And so, so a couple things. So potency matters. Also, the time of application. So one of the things that I discovered in my research is that, in fact, keeping something on the body or keeping it in your under your tongue. So homeopathic remedies, when dosed in the mouth, are typically dissolved under the tongue. So by keeping something dissolving slowly in your tongue, it actually increases the effect of it or the dosage of it, and as well as with the gels. So if somebody's got a problem and you're using a gel, I highly recommend just reapplying frequently because it will increase the efficacy of it. And then the third one for either your for really your rubbing, what I call rubbing gels, or the gels you're going to find, you're going to want to put a larger area on. So those are the three components of homeopathy and how it affects the how it affects the efficacy. So you want to, I'll repeat, you want to increase the potency if you can. You want to apply or dissolve frequently and for long periods of time. And then at least on the topical version, you want as large a piece as possible. And so, or in case of the rubbing. And so this was research that I did because, of course, I have a couple of unusual, like because of the engineering approach and the chiropractic approach, chiropractic background, I'm much more involved in the physical than most homeopaths. And so using this, I basically figured out that the best way to apply homeopathy is actually topically. There's a couple of good reasons for it. One, it stays local. Let's say you have a bruise or you have a sprain or you have a strain, you want to do it locally because it basically doesn't go systemic. It's locally happening right there at the location of which you're either doing the rub-in gel or the patch. The other point is keep it on as long as possible. And so what we did was we actually made a patch that will stay on the body and not dissolve and not and continuously continuously apply the remedies for long periods of time. In fact, most of the time, like when I have an injury, I'll do it for days because I don't want to swell. And the last one is to be able to have very high potencies applied locally. And though that is the best way to increase the effectiveness of arnica. We'll talk about some other remedies that you want to use for other things. But if you've got a bruise, get as high a potency as you can, keep it on as long as possible, and put as big of a patch as possible. Any questions about that, Doc?
Yeah, so we're talking about bruises right now. And,
Mhm.
bruises pretty much heal on their own. They may cause some discomfort for a couple of days, unless it's more severe. But what are some of the things that you've seen that arnica and other homeopathic remedies have been able to help different pain syndromes that are more severe?
So, arnica is very good for soft tissue, meaning the parts that you squish, the fat around your body. Very good for muscles as well. And so if you've got swelling or pain due to the tissue, what we call soft tissue, or the fat pad, or you have it due to a muscle problem, arnica in general is your best remedy. However, if you've got a ligament problem or a tendon, you actually need other remedies. Okay, so this is where I assume you will this might be something where people might want to write these down because these are remedies that most people don't know. One of them is called ledum. Ledum is good for ligament and tendons, and it's also what's used for black eyes. It is, if you get punched in the eye area, you want to get ledum on as soon as possible because it can keep your eye from swelling shut. I've got many cases of that, including my children. And so you want to use ledum if there's ever a problem with ligament or tendons or a black eye, you want to use ledum. Same thing with ruta. With ruta, it's again ligament and tendons. It's also good for goose eggs or blows to the head. You know, when a child, you know, you've seen this with a kid that has swelling of their head. Ruta is fabulous for that. You will watch that swelling go right down. It is also really good for the part of the ligament that it actually affects the most is the part which we call as chiropractors the insertion point, or the point that is closest to the bone. Last but not least, the last one you want to use is rust tox. And rust tox again is a general ligament and tendon. I know for instance in the ACL it is the remedy that is most used when you have an ACL damage. And so again,
ACL, let's just slow down.
oh,
Tell
that's a
people
good
what
point.
ACL is, okay?
Point.
Anterior cruciate ligament, where's it located? Tell people about that. Come on.
Yes, thank you, Doc. You get a little bit into habits being in the athletic world. So the ACL is what you always see your football players mess up. It's when they hurt their knee and they basically fall down, and it's basically in the inside of the knee. And I think it's probably one of the most common injuries in sports. And so when you will see your favorite sports person hurt their knee, most of the time when they end up having to have surgery, it's the ACL, or known as the anterior cruciate ligament. So yes, thank you for making me do
Sure.
that.
And so you've seen cases of people who have the ACL ligament where it's swollen, inflamed, and it really helps to relieve and eliminate that pain and prevent even surgeries. Have you seen that?
No, so you're not going to prevent the ACL surgery, but you can reduce the swelling dramatically. So I will give you the story of how I realized that what I had invented was significant. So I had invented it when I was in chiropractic school, just a concoction, right? And I knew it worked. I'd been using it for years with patients. I actually looked all around the world because I thought, oh, somebody has to have this in somewhere in the world. Has to exist. So I went to India. I looked at in India. I looked in Europe. I looked in the United States. Couldn't find it, but it's fine. Okay, I'll just use it on my patients. Not worry about it too much. So lo and behold, I'm a tennis player. So I rupture my ACL, anterior cruciate ligament, like all good tennis players. And I take my concoction, same remedies I just told you, the four we talked about, arnica, ledum, ruta, and rust tox. And I put my concoction on my knee and it doesn't swell. Well, I don't know. I realize that most people swell with ACL ruptures, but I figured maybe 5 or 10% of the population doesn't. And I was just helping that. I was helping it maybe 20% was what I expected, something like that. So because I knew I was able to get to the head of orthopedics at Northwestern University, one of the top universities in the country, and I went to see the head of orthopedics, who had been the head of orthopedics for 30 years, probably worked on Michael Jordan because he was responsible during that period for the Bulls. He was the orthopedic surgeon for the Bulls, which is a basketball team in Chicago. And I go and see him and he's like, did it swell? And I'm like, no, I don't think anything of it. He looks at me and he's like, I have been head of orthopedics for 30 years. I have never seen an ACL that doesn't swell. And of course, it's fine. You know, I used this concoction on it and he just thought I was crazy. And I said, it doesn't matter, just fix my knee. So, like all good homeopaths and functional medicine people, I don't love drugs. And so I get my surgery done and I don't use any anti-inflammatories. I didn't want to use the Celebrex. I used my same concoction. So I see him every single week after I get the surgery done. And he's going, you need to use the anti-inflammatories. I don't care if you don't use the pain meds, but you've got to use the anti-inflammatories, because what he's afraid of is typically when you don't use anti-inflammatories, at a month, you can't move your knee. It's completely locked, it's completely swollen. And this is what he's afraid that I'm going to look like. Well, lo and behold, instead of that, I, at 1 month, could walk around on it fine. I had almost no swelling at all. And he looked at me, and I remember this distinctly. He said, Joe, I did not believe you when you told me your ACL did not swell when you injured it. He said, but I've been watching you for a month, and you are better than 90% of my patients that use anti-inflammatories. You've discovered something remarkable. And that was what got me to write my first patent, because it was the fact that he was somebody that was absolutely, completely, this is not possible. There's no way homeopathy works. There's no way you kept the swelling. And when you take somebody that's done as much research, I've done a lot of research in my background too, and you take somebody who has done as much research as I have and is super conservative like Dr. Schaefer was, and they decide on one case that this is remarkable, you know that you're no longer on Earth. You're like in Venus or something, because you're not even close to anything that he's ever seen before. And that was the first point that I realized how amazing what I had discovered was.
Now, did you have a surgery? Did this doctor do a surgery on you?
Mm-hmm. That's
Okay,
what
so
I'm sorry.
he did a
So yes,
surgery. Yeah.
yep.
Okay.
So he did the surgery, and it was okay. So he did the surgery. I went and visited after the surgery. I went, you have to go every week to go see them. And 1 month, maybe I wasn't very clear, 1 month after the surgery, normally your knee is completely swollen. Mine wasn't swollen hardly at all. I could bend it almost completely normally. And it was the fact that I was so different. Even when you use anti-inflammatories like Celebrex, you still have a considerable amount of swelling. I just didn't.
Yeah. So have you seen this effective remedy work in other patients with similar injuries? Have you seen it work on more than
Tons.
just yourself?
Yeah, so tons, like patients, obviously during the years before this, but as we have brought out our product, Active Men, we have amazing stories. For instance, there's a case study done at the University of Illinois by the head athletic trainer for football. There was a kid there's a kid that sprained his ankle in 2019, a football player. And it's pretty typical. You're out for 3 weeks. It's very normal. I think all of your listeners have probably sprained their ankle, and they know that it swells, and they know that they're going to be hobbling around on crutches for a little bit. So he goes back and plays 3 weeks later. Same kid, same ankle, same grade sprain, same severity of sprain. He uses Active Mend, and he's back in a week. We cut the recovery time down to a third. A college I can't reference, but is in Texas, we actually had them measure the swelling of a kid who had sprained his ankle. He sprains it on Thursday night. They put the Active Mend on it, and I'm sure all of your users, generally the day after you swell it, it's blown up like a crazy thing, right? The swelling the next day was less than it was swollen within a half hour of the sprain. It had actually decreased the swelling. And so all of these football teams have every modality you want. They've used ice therapy, they use compression, etc. And so the next day, the athlete comes in to get all of the electrical stim and all of those things done. And so they remove the Active Mend, and they're doing I have an email on all of this, so I know, I remember, I look at it fairly frequently. And what he describes, the athletic trainer describes, is that after they pull the Active Mend off, as they're using all of the other modalities to heal the ankle, they actually realized it was starting to swell because the active-men wasn't there anymore, and they stopped the other modalities and put the active-men back on. We have a lovely case of really, this one was fun. So there's a pro tennis player, Angela Kulikov, and she basically was had back pain for an entire year. Okay. She had such bad back pain, she couldn't tie her shoes. She's 24. She cannot tie her shoes. But shockingly, she's going to go play tennis. I'm not sure how you do that, but she is going to go play tennis. So the physical therapist, all of the tennis, all of the pro tennis tournaments have physical therapists on staff. So the physical therapist says to Angela, you're really in a lot of pain. Let's try this patch. And Angela's just looking at her going, really? I've tried every pain patch. I've tried injections for steroids. I've tried acupuncture. I've tried, every single therapy that exists. I've tried, salon pause and all of the other, patches out there. In fact, I call them pain. She used to refer to them as placebo patches because she's like, none of them work. And you really think this patch is going to work? And she's like, yeah, I really do. So she, Angela's like, well, it's not going to do anything. It's not going to hurt me. She puts it on her back. The next morning, she can tie her shoes. The next morning, where she was just trying to get through the match, just wanted to play one match and finish it, didn't expect to win. She wins that match, keeps wearing that patch. She wears a patch every night for the whole week, wins the match, wins the tournament. Then she continues wearing it on and off for the next year. And she goes from a ranking of 500 to, I think at the peak, she was 57. And the first time I went to the US Open, she got into the US Open that year. The first time I went to the US Open, the first match, I got to see her play. And she would not have been there. Had not given her the patch.
Wow.
So
that's a great story.
It is. I mean, it's one of those things, and I think that, Doc, you can agree with this. We do what we do because we really want to help people. It's about these stories. I mean, I love when I get emails from people that are basically like, I've had a rotator cuff problem for 5 years. I've tried everything on it. I put this patch on and I'm out of pain. Or plantar fasciitis is another thing. We had a runner who basically had plantar fasciitis on and off for 7 years, right? She uses our patch and it clears it up completely. 6 months later, she's not got it. And she dropped. So those of you, if you've got anybody that's a marathon runner, they're going to understand this. I've never run a marathon in my life. They're going to understand it better. She dropped 20 minutes off of her marathon time and it ended up in the sub 3 hour category. That's how much it helped her. Because she doesn't,
Wow.
You think about it, she could only run so much. And now she's able to train as much as she wanted. And so, yeah, it's just, those are the stories. And I'm sure you're the same. Those are the stories that make us thrilled about what we do. It's really helping people.
Sure. So a question I have is going back to the tennis player. You said that she ended up having to wear the patch and she wore it for a year. Is this typical, or do people only have to wear it for a small duration of time?
It completely depends. So what I would guess with the tennis player, so it depends on what the source is. So typically, if the source is purely ligament and tendon or muscle, you won't need to use it. Like the plantar fasciitis person, as far as I know, she's never worn it again. I don't know. In the case of the back, Doc, you know this as well as I do, there are a million different things that can cause back pain. My guess, and this is pure conjecture on my part, of course, she's had MRIs and everything done. I don't think they ever really quite figured out what's going on, but my guess is the source of the core source of that back pain is probably not muscle, ligament, or tendon. It's probably something else. slight herniated disc, some maybe a malformation of her back in some form, facet problems. It is something else besides ligament, tendon, and muscle, and I can't fix it. So I wasn't in that case. She had to keep using it because I could not fix the underlying problem. Whereas rotator cuff problems, which is basically I'm pointing to my rotator cuff, but of course no one sees me. But basically, it's basically shoulder problems. Most of those are ligament, tendon, and muscle, and so in that case, most of the time when somebody uses it, they won't need to use it again. And when I
But
say she used it
how long
over,
typically how long do you find that somebody with a rotator cuff problem or like in the foot with the plantar fasciitis, how long typically will the people have to treat and wear the patches for? Just typically, as a rule.
so we designed the treatment plan to be you basically wear one patch. Sorry, you wear 5 patches. You wear a patch for 5 days, replacing it every 24 hours. And in 80-90% of the time, that will be enough to pretty much take care of everything. And there's going to be differences. Like some people, like if it's a minor problem, you basically, you're not in pain 2 or 3 days later. Save the rest of them for the next injury you have. But most people, pretty much everything, unless a really, really bad rotator cuff tear, you can generally you only need to wear it for 5 days, and you should be done with it, and you shouldn't need to wear it probably ever again, or maybe if you re-injure it, sometime,
Okay.
some months or
All
years
right.
later.
I've got a couple of questions. Okay. So, number one, we talked earlier about homeopathic potency. And
Mhm.
again, for our listening audience benefit, a homeopathic potency is the more dilute, the weaker that you make the remedy, the more potent it becomes, correct?
Yep.
Okay. So let me ask you this question, okay? You mentioned earlier that a lot of these ointments and these salves that are homeopathic, they have low potency. And yet with
Yes.
your patch, you put high potency. Why do they only use low potency and you decided to use high potency?
So the reason I decided, I mean, we know this from the dosages that we use as practitioners, that you take by mouth. We know that the higher potency are more effective. So that's well established for hundreds of years. Okay, it's not something I came up with. It's something that's known from the beginning of homeopathy. We understood that higher potency means higher effectiveness. Okay, so that's known. What the reason why the gel? So it actually in the beginning I didn't know. I didn't understand. I actually had tried to make just have a pharmacy make a gel similar to what you find with Tramiel or Arnicare in a higher potency. So the patch I made is about 1,000 times the potency of Arnicare. And so I tried to make that originally for my patients. Right? This is well before I ruptured my ACL, right? I just wanted to make it for my patients, but it didn't work. And what I learned later, much later, is that it turns out you have to change the way you manufacture it in order to make it in a high potency. And there's only one known way that I know of that you can make it in a patch at a high potency. And we actually now have 10 patents on that process. So, what I know as a homeopath is effectiveness increases with potency. And so, therefore, to maximize the response, I increase the potencies so that it's more effective. Did I answer your question well?
Yeah, but I'm just still trying to wrap my head around why these other remedies that are gels and salves that they don't use higher potencies. I'm just curious why they're not doing that.
Because it doesn't work. I did this once. So I've done this many times actually. I took the same process to which they make their gels. Okay. Everyone makes it the same way. They add the ingredient in the end. It's the way it's made, been made probably for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, right? The problem is, which we're not going to go into because it gets into a lot of things related to molecules, et cetera, et cetera. It turns out that the way homeopathy works, that it when I did the same thing with my patients, I'm like, oh, I'll just have somebody make a pharmacy make it for me. And I was shocked. It didn't even work as well as the low potency stuff. I took a high potency, mixed it the way they did it, didn't work at all. And what I had to learn, and took me about like 4 to 5 years to figure this out completely, is that you have to change the manufacturing process in order to make a high potency. And they don't make it because they didn't know this until I actually stumbled upon it. I actually completely stumbled upon it. It was totally by accident that I figured it out. So you basically, they don't make it because if you add it the way they do, it doesn't work at all. If you change the manufacturing process, it does work.
Mhm. Okay, good. Well, it's fortuitous that you stumbled upon it, and now your patients are able to get benefit, and that's wonderful. So I just wanted to see. By the way, I just was thinking about this for a minute. I didn't mention to this, and we had a conversation before this podcast. But I have a dear friend that owns a homeopathic company as well. His name is Dr. King. Do you happen to know Dr. King by any chance?
Dr. King, I don't know Dr. King.
Okay,
I think I've heard of him, but I don't know him.
okay, gotcha. All right. Anyways, let's talk about some other remedies that people can use homeopathically. I know I'm going to give people the opportunity to get your patch. We'll put it in our newsletter, and we'll let people know where they can get it and give me that information. But let's talk about some other homeopathic remedies that you've seen over the years that people can use for different types of illnesses. Let's give me a couple of examples. Give us our listening audience a couple of examples.
Okay, so there's a fabulous remedy called Ignatia, and I'm assuming that you're going to basically we'll write these up so that they can so that they can look at it. So Ignatia is amazing for grief. It is. I think I told you it's like when I die, I think I'm gonna have bowls of it sitting in the funeral home.
Mm.
It basically is for that time when you're crying, when you're just sobbing, and you anything you look at, you just want to sob. It is phenomenal. Now let's talk about potencies. In general, we do not, as homeopaths, recommend you go as a non-trained homeopath anything above a 30C. The only time you can go pretty universally at a higher potency are these special cases: arnica, ledum, ruta, ignatia. Okay. I would not actually, I'm going to jump back to something we were talking about. I would not recommend going high potency on rust tox if you're doing it orally, if you're doing it in the mouth. Locally, it's fine. With a patch, it's fine. But orally in the mouth, it can be used for things other than that. It's not recommended. But Ignatia, let's jump back to, so we're going to jump back to the grief remedy, Ignatia. If somebody really close to you has died, I would go, and you can just write this down I would go with a 1M or even a 10M. And the beautiful thing is, and this is going back to one of the questions, you can't overdose yourself. The same thing with these remedies. When you're using them for a very, very acute short-term thing, you do not have to worry about overdosing. So Ignatia, what I generally do, I actually send it to anyone I know who's had a loss of a loved one. And I just tell them, take it as needed. You can take it every 20 minutes. And again, in this case, you're taking it by mouth, you're dissolving it under the tongue. Take it every 10 minutes, take it every 20 minutes. When you feel like you're going to cry and you just want to cry, pop it in your mouth, dissolve it. It'll settle things down. Maybe a half hour, maybe an hour, maybe a day later, you're feeling that pressure again of wanting to cry. Take your Ignatia again. Another one that
Okay,
is
before you move on, Let me just ask this question. I'm going to play devil's advocate here, okay? If a person has somebody that they love has died, don't you want to be able to still have that emotion of crying and let it out and get rid, let it be able to be expressed?
So that's a great question. I would say that, I guess personally, it depends on the person. What you really are worried about in that case isn't the crying. That's not why you're necessarily taking the ignatia. It's for the other things that tend to go along with the grief. So it doesn't, and by the way, this is a fabulous question because it's 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 very complex. What you're really trying to do is keep you from doing the things like not being able to sleep, because and the other secondary things that are associated with grief, feeling anxious or feeling like you don't want to eat, or just worrying. It's yes, it helps with the crying. That's the indication of what you help it with, but it's not like you don't. I take ignatia regularly. It's like you are able to focus on the love of that person, and not it becomes this looking at them and loving them, and having the concept of remembering them as a person, as opposed to the what can be too much, where you're so hurt. It doesn't take away your memory of the person, it simply takes away the hurt related to it more. And in my opinion, it allows me, I take it regularly because I'm very sensitive to grief. It allows me to love and think of the love of the person more, and not my own pain. Does that make sense?
Okay.
And the real piece is, you don't have the things like the insomnia and other things that tend to go along a lot of time with grief.
Well, that's
Does
a
that
very
help?
good answer to that question. Thank you for answering that. I think that would be very helpful for our listening audience to be able to utilize that remedy, because we all go through grief. We all have loved ones that we lose. And, like you said, if it's going to help people to be able to sleep better and have the appetite that's still going to be sufficient and those things, that's certainly going to be a great remedy for a lot of people. Okay, so what about other remedies that you could recommend?
The other one that I recommend very much so is something called calendula. Calendula is fabulous for healing wounds. I use it for wounds. If I have a cut, I will rub it on. I use it for sunburns all the time. Basically, it is our number one remedy for and I'm going to hold this up. I actually was all prepared. Basically, this is a calendula. You can buy it at the store. You, in this case, will typically take it as a cream. This is a low potency, but it works fine. I love calendula. I use it all the time.
And what's the name of
Another,
that brand? What's the name of that brand?
this one is Boy Run. So, so Boy Run, if you guys want to see it,
Yeah, you can
very
pick that up at
fine.
Whole Foods. That's at Whole Foods.
You can
Yep,
find it whole. There's Boy Run, there's Highlands, there's a number of different calendula ones.
sure, sure.
I think I use them interchangeably. I love them.
Okay.
There's another
What
one.
about people? What about? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
There's another one that's lovely. I'm holding it up. It's called Sting Stop. Okay. This is lovely. It's got calendula in it, but it also has other remedies in it. And it's really lovely if you get bit by like a mosquito or a bee. It will have a remedy called apis in it. And I use it, I keep it in my house all the time. And it's just a lovely thing. It's again a topical if you get bit by something.
Is it like good for bee bites as well?
Yeah.
Bee stings? Okay, good. Spider bites? Okay. So how do you spell that remedy? That
It's
particular
called
ointment?
it's called Sting. It's got lots of S's. SSSSTINGSTOP.
Gotcha. Wonderful. What about, people, a lot of people will end up having some disturbances in their gut after they maybe had a meal that they ate maybe too much, or they have some problems with maybe a little flu symptoms. What would you recommend? What remedies would you recommend for that?
So we had this conversation. So there's a couple different remedies. There's acylcarcinicum, which is a very popular one that's used for flu. You take that as soon as possible. After you think you were exposed to the flu, take it right away, or if you think you're coming down with it. So that's a lovely one. There's also another remedy that's not for stomach upset, but it's used for colds. So a lot of people don't know that Zicam, which is a very popular remedy for colds, is a homeopathic remedy.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so
So
that one I use.
how do you take that?
So Zicam uses directed, but there's some of the dosages are where they basically put something into your nose, or you might take it orally into the mouth. It just depends on what version you get.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful.
So
That's good. Well, that's certainly really good. I've been a fan of oscillococcinum. That's really a mouthful, but I've been a fan of it for years and years. And not only have I seen it work very, very effectively and quickly for flus, but for people who have upset tummies. And as you mentioned, you've got to take it right away. Within hours, find out within the first couple, 2, 3 minutes, within certainly the first 3 or 4 minutes. And I carry it around wherever I go. I know there's one time I was on a basketball floor playing full court basketball at Kent State a couple of years ago, and I ended up starting to get really sick, like I was going to just vomit, and I just knew I was starting to come down with the flu or something. And so I went over to the bench because I had some oscillococcinum in my gym bag. I took one dose. It comes in a little vial, and as 15 minutes later, took another one. After 3 doses, I was back on the basketball floor playing full court basketball for another hour and a half after that. I've seen it work wonderfully like that for hundreds of my patients, and it's a great remedy. So, but once again, let's get back to talking about your patch, because I'm really intrigued by how you came up with that, how you stumbled upon it, and the high potency, and how effective it is for back pains and sprains and strains and various types of ligament and muscle joints and pains. Um, this is something I think a lot of people can benefit from. And so, how do people get your remedy? Where would they be able to acquire that?
So the name of the product is Active Mend, and it's a patch. I want to be clear.
How do
It's
you
a
spell
patch.
it? How do you spell it?
ACTIVMEND.
Do you have a patch there in front of you to show us?
Of course I do. I come
Oh,
prepared.
right.
This is it.
Just as I mentioned, right? All right. Can they buy it online? Can they buy it online?
So so this is the outside box. This is the inside box. And then basically I'll pull a patch out right here. And yes, you can absolutely buy online. You can buy it at activemen.com, and you can also buy it at Amazon. So if for those of you that might want to see it, it's just a patch, right? We'll just put it nicely on your arm. If it's somewhere we supply it with tape and wrap, so that if you like here, it's fine, it'll probably stay, but you can put an ace bandage around it to hold it in place. But if you're putting it on an elbow, which is going to be bending, you want to put tape or wrap around it to keep it in place, or an ace bandage, or just a shirt or something, a compression garment, anything to hold it in place. But as you can see, it stays fine. Now, what's the key is, and I want to go back to this about talking about the acylcarcinicum. You don't, when you're using it for these acute situations, you don't have to worry about taking too much. And typically, when it works, just like your experience with acylcarcinicum, which I'm terrible at pronouncing, is you will typically notice it works very quickly. And so do not worry about taking too much in these narrow situations where you're talking about Ignatia or arnica or the Activin patch, not a problem. But with Activin, one of the things that really matters to me is to be very, very honest. It works on ligaments, it works on tendons, it works on muscles, it works on swelling of what we call soft tissue or the fat around your bones. But it's not going to help you with arthritis. Only time it ever helps you with arthritis is if you've got a lot of swelling with it, and then it will probably help with arthritis. But similar to the discussion about Angela, I will never heal the underlying problem. Whereas with a ligament or a tendon, most of the time it is. Same thing with back
Yeah.
pain. With back pain,
So,
there's a lot of times we cannot, like if you have a herniated disc, I am not going to be able to heal that with active mend.
yeah. Now you mentioned that you've helped rheumatoid arthritis. There's a lot of swelling with rheumatoid arthritis. Does your patch work for rheumatoid arthritis?
No, it does not.
Okay, just out of curiosity. Okay, all right. Well, what are some of the misconceptions that people have with homeopathy or about homeopathy?
Well, I mentioned that a lot of people believe that it is the same as herbal, and it's very much not. The biggest misconception is that it doesn't work. I mean, one of the things I love about this is you have a large number of people see a very obvious indication of that it will work. People perceive that that they don't understand the potencies. There's lots of misconception and misunderstanding on potencies, and whether, like there's the whole nomenclature of it is completely different than anything you've ever seen. And
Mhm.
so you'll find in your Whole Foods, you'll find a 30C. Those are generally safe for everyone. Don't worry about it too much. But as I won't even go into like how the potencies increase, because the nomenclature is just completely different than what anybody would have.
Sure.
So
Now, there is quite a bit of research on homeopathic remedies and the benefits, isn't there?
so there's a lot of research, but I'm a bit of a this is one of the areas I'm a bit of a stickler on. There's a lot of research. Some of it is not very good. Specifically, I some years ago I looked at all of the research that had been done on arnica, for instance, and there's positive arnica cases and there's negative. The negatives ones typically were cases where they either used it for something it doesn't do it for. So a lot of misconceptions that people have, for instance, you will see that like somebody does a study. I want to design a study that's going to definitely not work. Design a study. Does arnica help with rheumatoid arthritis? I can tell you no. You do a
Hmm.
study for that, and guess what? It's going to be negative. Or they'll
Hmm.
do a study. There's a study out there that was for post. So they did a study where they did basically muscle soreness after running a marathon. Well, they what we call underpowered it. It would be sort of like telling us that aspirin doesn't or Tylenol doesn't work for pain based on it not changing the pain substantially for open heart surgery. It's just not a strong enough painkiller for that. It works great for headaches, but open heart surgery, it's not designed for. And so I
Hmm.
saw a large number of studies that where they basically did not give the person enough of a dosage or potency. So those are the
So,
two major things that I have, but there's a large number. We actually published an article, Ledham study, where it was published in the premier plastic surgery journal, and with the same technology, and 51.9% of the patients recovered 5 to 7 days faster, and it was done with the premier physicians in the industry. So if
yeah.
you design
So,
the study well, then they're
yeah.
very positive.
So, do you think that it's possible that the pharmaceutical industry would like to distort those studies just because they're afraid that more and more people are going to move towards, homeopathic remedies? Do you think that might be possible?
You're not going to like my answer. No, they don't care. So
Okay.
I work very closely with pharmaceutical. I don't work with them, but I know them well because the world I lived in plastic surgery, there's a large number of pharmaceutical companies. They don't think about homeopathy. I've talked to a number of them and asked that specific question. They're like, we don't even think about it. It's not something that hits our radar. They don't know anything about it. They do not care.
Okay.
Years ago, 200 years ago, it was a thing, but not recently. Right now, they're making a ton of money on Celebrex and really don't care about homeopathics.
Okay. Well, listen, Doc, we've run out of time. I want to thank you for coming on the other side of medicine. I'm sure we'll have you back again in the future. And so you have a really wonderful evening, and we'll be talking again soon. And thank you so much again. Take care.
And again, thank you so much for having me on the show. I've really enjoyed it.
My pleasure.